Good morning. Today is Monday, March 23rd. It is officially Monday. I hope you all had a great weekend. It's been so sunny out this weekend. I spent a lot of time outside on Saturday. Did not get outside today as much because it's a little bit colder, but I did go on my deck for just a little bit. It's just too cold for me. I wish it was warmer. But I hope that you were still able to get outside, ride your bike, go for a walk, whatever you were able to do. I hope you were able to get into that sunshine. So, today is National Puppy Day, which is awesome because I know a lot of you have puppies or at least dogs. So, if you want to send me any pictures of your dogs or your puppies, or maybe your dog when they were a puppy, you can send me those pictures in your daily writing journal. I would love to see them. It is the 123rd day of school. Whoa. And I hope you have a fantastic day. So, before I let you go, before you get going on your work or doing anything you need to do today, I would like to read our next chapter of No Talkie. So, we're on chapter 18. Look, there's only 2 more chapters, I believe, after this one. So, chapter 18 is called Adventures in the Red Zone. All right. Mrs. Hyatt got back to her school at 11:59. There were several messages on her desk, and Mrs. Overby had taped a note on her chair that read, "Please come see me in the teacher's room." But the principal was in a hurry. She needed to be on time for 5th grade lunch. 5 minutes later, for the second day in a row, Mrs. Hyatt found herself standing in the middle of a silent cafeteria, holding a big red plastic bullhorn. But today, it was different. She looked around the quiet room in the sight of all these 5th graders deliberately disobeying her. Well, it nudged her over the edge. It pushed her right into the red zone. All right, so far it does sound the same as our red zone that we use at school. Uh-oh, let's see how she reacts. She gritted her teeth, and an angry haze filled her mind. She knew she was angry. And she knew it wasn't good to be angry, but she was. And she knew it wasn't good to be angry and try to talk to the children at the same time. Now, I think maybe the week before we talked about angry feelings and how you should respond instead of react so that you can let yourself calm down and not have those angry feelings before you talk to someone, especially if it's the person you're angry at. So let's see if she reacts negatively or if she responds calmly. All right, fingers crossed. She knew it wasn't good to be angry and try to talk to the children at the same time, but she couldn't help herself. She had to talk to these kids right now. She could have whispered, and every 5th grader would have heard her, but she didn't whisper. She pulled the trigger on the bullhorn. "Have you forgotten our assembly this morning?" The principal's voice echoed off the walls. The kids stared at her. She aimed the bullhorn at Dave and yelled, "David Packer, answer me. Do you remember what I told all of you this morning?" When Dave nodded his head, she yelled, "Answer me with your voice out loud." So Dave swallowed his first bite of macaroni and cheese and said, "I remember." His voice sounded very small. Dave felt like he was the scarecrow talking to the great and powerful Oz. Mrs. Hyatt took 5 steps closer to Dave and shouted, "Then why aren't you talking with your friends?" Dave had never seen Mrs. Hyatt this mad before, and no one had ever yelled at him with a bullhorn. It seemed unfair to be yelled at with that giant voice. So he decided he wasn't going to be afraid or angry, no matter what. Dave shrugged and said, "Nothing to say," which was perfectly true. Before Mrs. Hyatt had started yelling, he had been very happy to just sit and eat and think. "Stand up." Dave stood up. Every kid in the room was watching him, and so was Mrs. Marlowe, and the custodian, and the cafeteria workers. Mrs. Hyatt said, "Talk. I want you to talk right now. I want to hear you tell Todd everything you learned in all your classes this morning. Start talking to Todd now. Dave wasn't an angry sort of kid. Not usually. In fact, there was only one thing that nudged him over the edge: being bullied. The only time he'd ever gotten into a fight at school was back in 2nd grade, when a 5th grader had started picking on him. That's when Dave had learned that you can't just go along with a bully, because then you get bullied more and more. All right, look, there was this picture. This is what Dave looked like. Oh, what does he look like? Is he scared? Is he confused? He's probably trying to figure out what to do. That's how Dave felt right now. He was getting mad. It felt like Mrs. Hyatt was being a bully with a bullhorn. Again, the principal yelled, "Talk!" And that did it. It was Dave's turn for a trip to the red zone. Uh-oh. It's not good if you're in the red zone and you react to a principal. So let's see what happens. He glared at Mrs. Hyatt and he shouted, "I do not have to talk now if I don't want to. This is our lunch. None of us have to talk." And a sentence flashed into Dave's mind. Something he had heard dozens of times on TV shows. This sentence was usually being said to criminals wearing handcuffs, but that didn't seem to matter at the moment. Dave looked around the cafeteria at his classmates, and he shouted, "You have the right to remain silent." And with that, Dave pressed his lips together, folded his arms across his chest, and sat down. Lindsay was the first to pick up on Dave's body language. She looked at Mrs. Hyatt and slowly folded her arms. All the girls at her lunch table did the same, and the gesture spread through the room like ripples on a pond. Every kid stared at the principal, arms folded, stone silent. Mrs. Hyatt looked around slowly, drew herself up to her full height, and then walked briskly out of the room. She walked down the hall to the school office. She nodded at Mrs. Chaplin, the school secretary, and said, "Hold my calls." Then she went into her own office and closed the door. Back in the cafeteria, it was dead calm. Every kid sat motionless, arms still folded, not sure what to do next. Todd started it. He unfolded his arms, nodded at Dave, then he clapped his hands. In 3 seconds, every 5th grade boy was clapping like mad. Dave looked around at his friends and smiled and nodded. And a second later, guess who joined in? That's right, all the girls. 5 seconds later, the hooting and whooping began. It was loud in that cafeteria. It was incredibly loud. The clapping and cheering was so loud that the sound went right through the cafeteria doors and walls and thundered down the hall, all the way to the school office, right through the closed door of Mrs. Abigail Hyatt, principal. The phone on Mrs. Chaplin's desk buzzed. An intercom call. "Yes," she answered. The secretary listened, nodded, and said, "Right away." She got up and walked out of the office and down the hall and into the cafeteria where it had gotten quiet again. Mrs. Marlowe was standing near the doorway, and Mrs. Chaplin whispered something to her. Mrs. Marlowe nodded and quickly walked halfway across the room. She bent down close to Dave Packer's ear and said, "To the office." Dave swallowed his 3rd bite of macaroni and cheese and looked up into the science teacher's face. "I have to?" She nodded. "Principal's orders." Dave looked around the table at his friends. No one needed to speak a word. Their faces said it all. And the message? 3 simple words, and Dave believed them. "You are dead." Okay, that's the end of this chapter for today. The next chapter, chapter 19, is called Apologies. So I bet we can come up with some predictions before we read this chapter tomorrow. All right, we'll stop right here, and I'll let you go get on with your day. If you have any questions about anything in the packet or anything online that you want mom and dad to ask me, they can email me. If you missed the other chapter that I read on Friday and you want to go back, you can probably find that video on my YouTube feed. You're probably more savvy than I am on there, and I bet you can find it. And if you can't, have mom and dad email me as well. All right, have a great day.